Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today it is a review. Well, more of an early impression, if you will, but I've worn this to bed a couple times and I really dig this fragrance. It is a amber-based fragrance, but we're going to talk a little bit about why amber gets put in quotes here. This is from the house of DS and Durga, and it is called Amber Kiso. If it'll focus. Amber Kiso. You'll have to take my word. There we go. Oh, it's gone. So Kiso basically means a Japanese forest, if you will. And the reason that they call this fragrance Amber Kiso is because many of the notes in here are trees of Japanese origin, okay? So for example, there is a cedar note, and it's actually a Japanese cedar called Cryptomeria. Okay, so Cryptomeria is a Japanese cedar. I can't say I know the difference between Japanese cedar and the cedar we're used to, but it sure seems like there is a difference. I just have a hard time actually describing it, which is a great way to start a fragrance review, I know, but that's the damned honest truth. I've never actually smelled Japanese cedar in and of itself. At least I don't think I have. And there is a cypress note in the top called Sawara cypress. Sawara. And Sawara cypress is grown in Japan. And so it's a Japanese cypress. And then to top off the Japanese trifecta, they have Japanese maple in this fragrance as well. So 3 fragrance trees, basically, all of Japanese origin, hence the name Kiso, or Japanese forest, if you will. That's the backstory on the fragrance. So I'm going to read you a little bit about what the brand has to say about the fragrance, because the little blurb says, a ritual in the holy Kiso forest, ceremonial katana, unguent of rare woods, temple incense, leather, bushi armor. So keep that leather armor feeling in the front of your mind, because as the fragrance dries down, it basically starts off like a little bit of a slightly resinous balsamic amber. So you're expecting an amber when you spray this, but very quickly what ends up happening is that very gummy resinous amber smell, which is the first thing my nose picked up on. And the very first time I smelled this, I was like, oh wow, this is starting out like a regular amber scent, you know? Because I read the blurb, and I kind of had an idea of what this scent was, because this is slightly popular in the fragrance community. There's a lot of people who really like this. So I was very excited to get to know Amber Kiso. But the first time I smelled it, I was like, man, this seems pretty like just a normal gummy resin amber. And a couple minutes in, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This is doing a lot of other weird things, because what ends up happening early on is you get this slightly like the resins are turning to smoke and fire, and it becomes incensey very quickly. Okay, so that incense note just kind of slides itself in there. And so for me, it goes resins, incense, and then a couple minutes later, you start to get in the background, your nose is going, man, now it seems like some of these green notes are getting slid in. And the green woody notes, obviously the Japanese cedar is probably a part of that with the incense, but that green cypress note is very well blended. It's like a lemony version of a cypress. It's like a lemony tint to the cypress, if you will. And so I think what DS and Durga did is brilliant, because they use this cypress that is of Japanese origin, Sawara cypress, okay? And it's a very sort of light take on cypress. If you know Japanese or Asian style fragrances in general, many Asian fragrances are with a very gentle touch, a very gentle hand, okay? And, you know, whenever they build their fragrances, I always feel like they never like the heavy sillage, heavy bangers, right? Now, I'm not saying this fragrance isn't heavy, because it absolutely is. This fragrance is a beast. It'll last on your skin for half a day. Maybe even more, easy. And so 12 hours, I think you'll easily get out of this fragrance. But it gets described more as like a woody and leathery fragrance than it does a amber. And that's because the fragrance actually transitions pretty well. And there's interesting variations to the transition. So this is one of those DS and Durga fragrances that has gone up in price as time goes on. If you watch old videos, you'll see people say 50 mil was 175 bucks when it first came out in 2018. Now 50 mils is $210, and 100 mils is $300. So it's gone up, although you can find these at discounters. I do see they are at discounters occasionally, Joma Shop and other stuff like that. I've never used Joma Shop. But here's the blurb from the brand. Japanese forests contain numerous trees with wood that is sacred in traditional religious ceremonies. The connection to the forest is realized in ritual offerings that include incense made from these rare woods. Hinoki's wood, strong timber, has been used for temples, Noah theaters, baths, and masu. Hinoki from the Kiso forest was sourced for the holy Icy Shrine in Mi Prefecture. Sawara cypress is a sturdy, lemon-scented false cypress with red, stringy bark. The timber is also used for temples and shrines. It grows wild on the islands of Kyushu and Honshu. I'm sorry to all my Japanese speakers out there. They're probably like, my ears. Asai Zuru maple is an ancient variety of maple native to Japan with beautifully ornate pink, white, and green leaves. Its name means swan at dawn. So there's a little blurb from DS and Durga. And the picture next to it is a guy holding like a traditionally wood-carved samurai, or maybe not samurai, but let's say bushi armor mask, if you will. So what's interesting, though, is the way that DS and Durga blended all of this together, because you read the name Amber Kiso, and you expect an amber. And you do get an amber. That's the thing. I've heard some reviewers say, you don't get an amber. To me, I get an amber accord. Absolutely. I 100% get an amber accord. Even hours later, I get an amber accord. But it changes and transitions, and I feel like your nose can sort of focus on different things. So when I wore this to bed the first time, like I said, that amber accord in the beginning felt like it stayed around a lot longer. Second time I wore it, I felt like the green aspects and the sort of smoky aspects came to my nose much quicker, because I knew what to expect. And today I'm wearing it as my scent of the day for the very first time, instead of just wearing it to bed for testing and stuff like that. So today I'm wearing it as my scent of the day, and same thing as when I wore it the second time. Since I knew what to expect, I really felt like I got much more of the incense and the green touches faster to my nose. But those green elements, because they use that Sawara cypress in the top, the Japanese Sawara cypress, it really sort of allows the amber and the smoky elements all to bloom, to blossom early on in the scent, okay? So it gives it a very gentle touch, very light touch, this green, evergreen feel, this coniferous green-like feel, just sort of slowly weaves its way into the scent. I'm reminded of maybe like a Japanese artisan, just very slowly and carefully chipping away, creating that mask for the bushi armor, right? This samurai-like mask, right? Out of wood, but it just very slowly and studiously making that mask, right? It just sort of takes its time, It's not rushed. It's on its own schedule, and that green cypress note slowly starts to come forward, stronger and stronger, almost to the point where you start to really recognize it as a cypress accord. This is not going to smell like Tom Ford's, gosh, I can never remember the name. I gotta look it up, because I feel like too many perfumes to remember. Tom Ford's Italian cypress. It's not going to smell like Italian cypress. It's not going to smell like Z14. It's not going to smell like Roja's Apex or anything like that, okay? This is going to give you little hints of a cypress accord. If you're a cypress fan, I would definitely urge you to check this out. It's going to give you little hints of a cypress accord, but that accord is weaved into the scent very slowly, almost like making a quilt, It's weaved in and out of the scent. And so mostly your nose is going to pick up on the incense. The incense is very prominent. And I'm not sure, I think it's just a frankincense note, to be honest with you. I think they've just used frankincense in the top, but it's a brilliant use of frankincense. I really, really like the way that the frankincense is used here. There is a very subtle, and I mean extremely subtle, iris note. There's also a very subtle patchouli in here. As you can see, I've mentioned many notes that have a subtlety to them, which usually don't, right? Cypress is usually very bracing and medicinal. Patchouli is usually very heady and dark and earthy. This patchouli is not heady and earthy and dark. The cypress is not green. Well, it is green, but it's not, bracing and medicinal. It's actually surprisingly soft and lemony. Now, there is a Hinoki cypress as well, which is supposed to give off a little bit of this terpenic smell that leans almost like a little bit like a warm milk. You can almost smell, but it blends into the amber-like accord very, very well. And so, like I said, the medicinal properties of the cypress really kind of take a back seat, but I think they are there. They just are blended so beautifully, weaved into the fabric of the scent. So if you imagine the third Japanese note in here, which is Japanese maple. Now, DS and Durga quoted a very specific type of maple in here, which was called Ashai Zuru maple. So again, sorry to my Japanese watchers, but pink, white, and green leaves. I have no idea how that smell differs from regular maple. There's not very many fragrances in my collection that use a maple note. One of them is this. This is Clive Christian E, and it's a very specific version of E called Gourmande Oriental. They came out with this in 2017. This was given to me as a gift by a watcher, Jeff, so thank you, Jeff. And of course, Clive Christian's boxes and packaging are just fabulous. But so this is E, Private Collection Gourmande Oriental, which I'll review one of these days, but this is much more traditionally what you would expect a maple smell to smell like. This is not a bad fragrance. It's just sweeter. It's much sweeter than DS and Durga's Amber Kiso. And, the maple note is much more traditionally what you would think about if you considered a maple. Many people are thinking maple syrup, right? This leans much more to the maple syrup side to me, whereas the maple, Japanese maple that's actually in DS and Durga's Amber Kiso, I feel like it retains some, almost like you're smelling the actual maple tree, hence the name, I think, Amber Kiso. There is a little bit of this caramel-like sweetness to the scent, okay? So imagine the slightest sugary brown tint, tinged or just sort of cooked with the incense-like feel. And just imagine, without smelling the maple syrup. So you're not just smelling maple syrup on pancakes here, okay? But it does add a little bit of this, bakery slash... There's a note apparently that's found in maple trees, and I don't know if it's in the maple, Japanese maple, but it's a note that's called maltol. And maltol is also found in barley, and sometimes it can give off a very alcohol, liqueur-like smell. And the tree here, imagine smelling the leaves of a maple tree, and just getting a little, when you draw in that breath, the back of that breath, draw in, right? That's where you get a little hint of that liqueured feel. Almost like the leaf has been dipped in liquor, if that makes sense. That's the way that the first couple hours go. So they open up very resinous and gummy, very ambery, traditional ambery. Very quickly it changes to the smoke and the green notes, and then it changes again, bringing in that iris slash patchouli slash Japanese maple note. The base is where the fragrance changes again. And that's one of the most interesting things to me, is the transitions. I think many ambers, when you consider an amber, when you think about an amber fragrance, right? And there's so many good ones out there. I'll review some this year because it's November now, so it's currently November the 13th, although you wouldn't know it in Texas. It's 68 degrees today. I don't even need a jacket yet. But, many places are just frozen over, but for us, it's still in the 60s. And so I'm, trying to bring out some of these colder weather scents, and ambers are perfect for the cold. But many people think about amber fragrances as being this sort of, warming, just very warm and cuddly like fragrance to put on during the cold. And there is a little bit of a facet to this scent as well, but this is a much more artistic take on an amber to me, because most ambers, like if you're thinking of something like Grand Soir, right? That is just a boring, generic amber to me. I'll review Grand Soir one of these days, and I know why people like it. It's very easy to wear, easy to throw on. It's sweet and garners compliments probably and all that stuff, right? But for me, That's the boring side of amber. And some ambers are very monotone. And what I mean by that is they sort of stay on the same wavelength, if that makes sense. You know, it's an amber accord that they've given you that's created from vanilla, labdanum, peru balsam, whatever amber they're creating, right? And it just sort of stays there. It gives it to you, and if you like that smell, great, but it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't change and evolve. This one does. This one changes and evolves and transitions and seems to sort of move around on the wavelength. Just doesn't stay on one wavelength. And it kind of changes between one fragrance that smells incense heavy versus a fragrance that feels amber heavy versus a fragrance that feels green. And finally, the dry down. And this is where I think I disagree with some reviewers who I've heard this scent called a leather scent. And I think that there is a leathery aspect to the scent, but I really feel like it's part of a transition, right? So the first explanation that I've been just, rambling on about for the last 15 minutes is the first part of the fragrance. The second part of the fragrance to me is once it gets to that heart note and it brings in more of the Japanese maple and you get some of that burnt caramel accord. The third part of the fragrance, right, is really when it transitions again and changes again. And that's where I have a late dry down here. I've got about a 6-hour dry down here. And that's where it brings in more of the leather and more of the hinoki cypress and the tree moss. And that leather accord that gets brought in is a very, I would say, a very tame leather, okay? So it's not a leather that is animalic or challenging. It's not going to remind you of horses or, to me, it's not even a charred or an ashy leather. For a fragrance that has so much frankincense in the top, and there is a lot of frankincense in the top. In fact, if I blind sniffed this fragrance, first sniff, once that frankincense really started to come out, once those gummy resins went to the background just a little bit, I might even call this an incense fragrance, first and foremost, because that's what the first part of the fragrance gives you. But as it dries down, what ends up happening is that incense and the greener notes from the cypress and the Japanese cedar go to the background, okay? And what comes to the foreground is this very smooth, very, very relaxing leather. Now, DS and Durga calls it a leather for a bushi armor, okay? Traditional, like, Japanese garb, right? You've seen the bushi samurai armor before, right? And so just imagine like one like leather plate over part of his body. I don't know where you want to imagine it, but just imagine this leather on top of this armor, right? But this leather was handmade by the family, right? This is not like a mass-produced leather. There are irregularities in the leather, let's put it that way, but it feels like the person who made it spent an enormous amount of time on the tiniest details, right? This Asian culture that really, in my mind, sort of translates to attention to detail and caring about your work and showing pride in your work, right? That kind of thing, right? No matter what you're doing, even if you're sweeping the floor, you're going to show pride in your work. That comes through in the leather note to me. I get this very smooth, but interesting and slightly relaxing, calming. It's a very calming type leather, especially when they're talking about a leather made for like war, right? But this is a very calming like leather. Doesn't come across as extremely animalic. It doesn't come across as something that's really going to challenge you too much, because now we're into the dry down. So everything is sort of slightly softer, just feels like everything's a little bit better blended together, but that leather note just sits on top of it all, like the armor, right? Think about the plates underneath the leather and all that stuff, but it just sits on top of it, a decorative shard of leather, if you will, behind the rest of the fragrance. And it's beautiful. I mean, I'm not going to lie. This is a fantastic amber fragrance. Now, would I pay $300 for 100 mil? Hell no. I can't buy any fragrances now anyways, but if I could, would I pay 100 for this? Yes, I would. I'd pay 100 for 100 mil. I would pay 100 for 100 mil. $1 a mil for this is very fair to me. But I think, if you have the money to burn, I think you could spend your $300 on much worse amber fragrances. And this takes you on a journey, and it takes you to a place where most ambers aren't going to touch. So is it an amber? Yes, I do. That's why I said at the beginning, quote unquote, amber, right? It is an amber. But there are so many twists and turns and everything else that's going on in the scent that I think if you're a fragrance head, if you're a connoisseur, you will appreciate this. You'll appreciate the extra attention to detail into the dry down. I do not think it's just a leather though. I think it's a amber, incense, green, you know, even that maple accord makes it interesting. And then the leather comes out. Very interesting fragrance by DS and Durga. I mean, a house that I haven't talked too much about on the channel, but I have to give it to them on this one. They really hit it out of the park. My favorite DS and Durga is a discontinued one, actually. It is this one, for those of you who are interested in my opinion. This is called Spirit of the Glen. I'm going to review this on the channel one of these days. This is my favorite DS and Durga, and one of my favorite liqueur fragrances of all time. It is absolutely fantastic. And I think they worked with Glen Levitt. Yeah, they worked with Glen Levitt to actually create the alcohol, the Scotch note in here. So fantastic fragrance. I mean, DS and Durga has made some amazing stuff, but their prices are also a little crazy sometimes. No offense to DS and Durga lovers and fans, but I think that some of their prices are out of this world. What was the one I was looking at the other day? That was, oh, here it is, 40 million year old amber, okay, 50 mils, $700. Like, what? Absolutely what? No, absolutely not. I don't care how good of an amber it is. And I don't think I've smelled that one, but that is just insane pricing. So some of their stuff is like, I don't know, man. I feel like I'm getting taken for a ride here. But stuff like this is very good, especially if you can get it at discounters. So that's kind of my ramble, my first early impression, if you will, on Amber Kiso. Thank you, Nick, again, for sending this very generous decant. More than enough juice to let me test multiple times and all that stuff. Thanks for watching, everyone. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.